The Chicago 7, originally Chicago 8, also Conspiracy 8/Conspiracy 7, were 7 defendants: Abbie Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, David Dellinger, Tom Hayden, Rennie Davis, John Froines, and Lee Weiner, charged by the U.S. federal government with conspiracy, inciting to riot, and other charges related to anti-Vietnam War and countercultural protests that took place in Chicago, Illinois, on the occasion of the 1968 Democratic National Convention. Bobby Seale, the 8th charged, had his proceedings declared a mistrial, dropping the number of defendants from 8 to 7. The trial resulted in 5 of the 7 being convicted for inciting riots. All were acquitted of conspiracy. However, during the trial, Judge Julius Hoffman sentenced all of the defendants to lengthy sentences for contempt of court. In subsequent proceedings, the judge's contempt charges were reversed, and all of the convictions for inciting riots were overturned. The 1968 Democratic National Convention was held in Chicago in late August to select the party's candidates for the November 1968 presidential election. Prior to and during the convention, which took place at the International Amphitheater, rallies, demonstrations, marches, and attempted protests took place on the streets and in the lakefront parks, about 5 miles from the convention site. These activities were primarily in protest of President Lyndon B. Johnson's policies on the Vietnam War, which were vigorously contested during the presidential primary campaign and at the convention itself. Anti-war groups had petitioned the city of Chicago for permits to march 5 miles, 8.0 kilometers, from the loop to within sight of the convention site, to hold a number of rallies at the lakefront parks and also near the convention, and to camp in Lincoln Park. The city denied all permits, except for one afternoon rally at the old band shell at the south end of Grant Park. The city also enforced an 11 p.m. curfew in Lincoln Park. Confrontations with protesters ensued as the police enforced the curfew, suppressed attempts to march to the International Amphitheater, and cleared crowds from the streets. The Grant Park rally on Wednesday, August 28, 1968, was attended by about 15,000 protesters. Other nearby activities involved hundreds or thousands of protesters. After the rally at the band shell, several thousand protesters attempted to march to the International Amphitheater, but were stopped in front of the Conrad Hilton Hotel, where the presidential candidates and their campaigns were headquartered. Police worked to push the protesters out of the street, and then used tear gas, verbal and physical confrontation, and batons to beat people who began to chant "The whole world is watching." The police made scores of arrests. The television networks broadcast footage of what was later called a police riot, 1, cutting away from the nominating speeches for the presidential candidates. Over the course of 5 days and nights, the police made numerous arrests, in addition to using tear gas, mace, and batons on the marchers. 2, hundreds of protesters and police officers were injured. Dozens of journalists covering the actions were also clubbed by police or had cameras smashed and film confiscated. In the aftermath of what was later characterized as a police riot by the U.S. National Commission on the Causes and Prevention of Violence, 3, a federal grand jury indicted 8 demonstrators and 8 police officers. Following the convention on September 9, 1968, a federal grand jury was convened to consider criminal charges. The grand jury focused on the possible grounds for charges in 4 areas. 4. Over the course of more than 6 months, the grand jury met 30 times and heard some 200 witnesses. President Johnson's Attorney General, Ramsey Clark, discouraged an indictment, believing that the violence during the convention was primarily caused by mishandling of the protest by the Chicago police. The grand jury returned indictments only after President Richard Nixon took office and John Mitchell assumed the office of Attorney General. On March 20, 1969, 8 protesters were charged with various federal crimes, and 8 police officers were charged with civil rights violations. The 8 defendants were charged under the anti-riot provisions of Title X of the Civil Rights Act of 1968-5, which made it a federal crime to cross state lines with the intent to incite a riot, or to conspire to do so. The Chicago 8 indictments alleged crimes of 3 kinds. 6. The 16 who were named as alleged co-conspirators but not indicted were Wolf B. Lowenthal, Stuart E. Albert, Sidney M. Peck, Kathy Bodine, Karina F. Fales, Benjamin Radford, Thomas W. Newman, Craig Shimabukuro, Bo Taylor, David A. Baker, Richard Boschino, Terry Gross, Donna Gripe, Benjamin Ortiz, Joseph Tornabene, and Richard Palmer. 7. There is evidence that at least one other person, Eric Weinberger, was considered for indictment. 8. The original 8 defendants indicted by the grand jury on March 20, 1969, were Abbie Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, David Dellinger, Tom Hayden, Rennie Davis, John Froines, Lee Weiner, and Bobby Seale. The trial began on September 24, 1969. 9. The defense attorneys were William Kunstler, Leonard Weinglass of the Center for Constitutional Rights, as well as Michael Kennedy, Michael Tygar, Charles Gary, Gerald Lefcourt, and Dennis Roberts. The presiding judge was Julius Hoffman, and the prosecutors were Richard Schultz and Tom Foran. On October 9, the governor of Illinois requested the United States National Guard for crowd control as demonstrations increased outside the courtroom.